The barks echoed down the corridor like a gunshot, sharp, deep, capable of freezing conversations and silencing an entire group of passengers at once. It was a narrow corridor with a low ceiling, full of posters asking for calm, cooperation, and safety. But at that moment, the only thing that existed was the deep sound of Rex trying to move forward, his paws scraping the shiny floor, the canine unit's vest pressing against his chest as if it were also trying to restrain him. Nobody wanted to go near him. He wasn't just any police dog. He was the most aggressive in the force, one of those animals whispered about like a legend known to all, but few dared to confront. They said that a single bark from him had brought a recruit to his knees months before, and that several instructors had stopped working with him after only a few days. On that shift, however, Mark was carrying the leash. Dark blue shirt, unshaven beard, a gaze that always seemed to measure the distance between what he felt and what he let on. He had the rigid posture of someone who had already carried a much heavier vest, with a different kind of plate armor, in a different kind of war. He didn't like drama, he didn't like stories, he wasn't easily impressed. But even so, the first thing he thought when he saw Rex's fur suddenly bristle was, "Something's up here." Airport passengers moved slowly through the security corridor. Colorful suitcases, backpacks covered in stickers, sleepy children dragging blankets. The usual routine. Rex moved between the lines, sniffing, guided by Mark's brief commands. Some moved a little ahead, others smiled nervously. One or two extended their hand without permission, and an agent stopped them with a, "Don't touch me, please." Rex walked past a black suitcase, ignored it. A red backpack, nothing. A baby stroller. The sweet scent of milk and talcum powder, a slight relaxation in his ears. And then, suddenly, he stopped. Every muscle in his body tensed, his head jerked sharply to the right, and a low growl erupted from his chest like subterranean thunder. The suitcase was small, with wheels, a faded pink with star stickers. In front of it stood a thin girl, about 8 years old, with messy braids and an oversized sweatshirt. She gripped the suitcase handle with both hands, as if it were the most important object in the world. Rex took a step forward. "Silence, Rex," Mark murmured, feeling the leash tighten. The dog didn't hear. Or, if it did, some other voice inside it screamed louder. The hallway, the gleam of the floor, the smell of coffee, cheap perfume, deodorant, everything vanished in a sudden wave of memories that weren't vivid images, but sensations. Thick smoke, the smell of gunpowder and blood, fine dust settling on its nose, a man's scream, the dry crack of something breaking. A flash. A distant order dragged along by memory. "Rex, search." The voice no longer existed in the present, but in the dog's brain it sounded so real that the body reacted before any thought. Rex jumped. The teeth sank into the fabric of the pink suitcase with the same force they had once sunk into the ankle of an insurgent fleeing through the ruins. The plastic creaked, the zipper ripped open, and the girl's scream filled the aisle. The passengers shuddered. Someone dropped a water bottle, which rolled and made an odd sound amidst the hurried footsteps. "Let me go, Rex! Let me go!" Mark's voice was now a burst of air, charged with urgency. For a moment that seemed eternal, Rex disobeyed. Instinct told him there was danger, that something in that suitcase was a threat. His heart pounded, he squinted, and the taste of torn fabric filled his mouth. Then something else came, a subtle, old-fashioned smell, buried beneath other odors. Dirty clothes, cheap soap, dust. Behind all that, however, there was another smell, sweat. The leather of military boots, gun oil, and an indefinable scent that only a dog would recognize. An invisible signature that linked that object to someone he had met almost at the same time he learned the meaning of the word war. Rex hesitated. The suitcase finally opened, and its contents spilled onto the hallway floor as if someone had opened a treasure chest full of memories in front of everyone. First fell a folded child's shirt with a dark brown stain right at the corner of the hem, like blood faded by time. Then a pair of small sneakers, dirty with dried dirt. A keychain with a miniature German shepherd. An old laminated military badge with a picture of a smiling man in camouflage uniform. And finally, sliding as if too fragile to touch the ground, a photograph on matte paper already slightly creased at the edges. In the photo, a uniformed man kneels beside a German shepherd with enormous ears and an attentive gaze. Behind them is a concrete wall stained with sand. In the man's arms, a small child, about 3 years old, clings to his neck and laughs, looking at the camera. Rex's eyes widened, and a strange sound escaped his throat, something between a whimper and a broken bark. The world spun around him. The hallway dissolved again into dust and explosions. The man in the photo turned, and for a second, the image from the past was perfectly superimposed on a faceless figure that haunted the dog's nightmares every night. "Rex, be quiet!" Mark was already kneeling, holding the leash firmly to the collar. "Come down, come down!" The girl fell to her knees beside the smashed suitcase, her hands trembling as she desperately picked up the photograph. Her large, dark eyes filled with tears. "It was my dad!" she cried, her voice breaking. "It was my dad!" People started recording. They raised their cell phones, curious. The officers ran over, and someone announced over the radio that the canine unit had carried out an unauthorized intervention. Perhaps it was a bomb, perhaps drugs. Protocol dictated that the area should be cordoned off. But as he got closer, Mark saw something else. Among the scattered clothes, a small black USB drive, attached to an old camouflage ribbon, stained with some kind of rust. The logo of the former military unit smiled ironically on the faded plastic. Mark felt a knot in his stomach. He recognized that symbol. Months earlier, in a file no one else wanted to look at, he had seen an identical coat of arms next to a far too brief report on the death of a former war comrade, who now existed only on bureaucratic papers. The laminated name tag rolled across the floor to his feet. Mark instinctively caught it before someone could step on it. He read it silently, swallowing hard. Daniel Herrera, Military Canine Unit. Rex was still panting, but now he was trembling. It wasn't the aggressive tension of before, but a much deeper fear. The dog fixed his gaze on the girl. On the photograph she clutched to her chest. On the name tag Mark held in his hand. The scent of that girl was the same one that, years ago, mingled with the dust and sweat of Daniel when he returned from patrol and knelt to hug the dog and the little girl who ran toward him with hesitant steps. The girl looked up, her face bathed in tears. Her eyes met Rex's. He was still baring his teeth, torn between his instinct to defend himself and a memory that was pulling him in another direction. "You," she whispered, without fear, without even thinking about whether she was safe or not. "You're Rex." It was the first time in months that someone had pronounced his name like that, not as an operational code, not as a danger label, but as if it were something dear, intimate, long lost. The growl died away in the dog's throat. His ears, which until then had been rigid, tilted forward, trembling. His tail, still tense, gave one last twitch. Mark felt the change more than he saw it. An unsettling silence filled the hallway, as if everyone were holding their breath at the same time. "Honey, pull back a little, okay?" one of the officers asked, extending his arm behind him. "The dog is dangerous." But the girl didn't even hear. She slowly extended her hand, her fingers dirty with dust from the torn suitcase, and brought them close to Rex's snout. There was no logic, no calculation. Only an invisible thread pulling the girl forward and the animal backward, as if, for an instant, the rest of the world had ceased to matter. Rex sniffed his fingertips. Beneath the scent of tears, of fear, of the airport, there was something else. The same faint aroma that clung to the old photograph, the USB drive ribbon, the stained blouse. Remnants of a home he had known elsewhere in another time. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the explosion that had taken more than just his partner, something inside Rex gave way. The tongue slid out of the opening of its snout and lightly brushed against the girl's skin. A single gesture, small, silent, but enough to elicit a murmur of astonishment in the hallway. "My God!" muttered an officer. Mark said nothing. He simply tightened the strap, not to hold on, but as if trying to cling to that strangely fragile moment. From that moment on, nothing would ever be routine again. Not for the dog, not for the girl, not for the man who watched it all without yet understanding that, with that tearing of the suitcase and the scattering of memories on the cold airport floor, not only had a security protocol been broken, but the seal of a past had been forcibly buried. That same night, far from the glow of the lobby, the police unit's dog pound heard the echo of the storm approaching the city. The first drops struck the tin roof tiles with an irregular sound, an eerie prelude that heralded lightning and thunder. Rex paced in circles inside his metal stall, his nails scraping the cement floor, his chest heaving with difficulty. The walls around him were cold and damp. 3 fences separated the central corridor from the stalls, and yet everyone knew that no one dared go through there alone when he was restless. To anyone observing him from the outside, he seemed simply a dangerous, nervous, perhaps uncontrollable animal. But inside, what tormented Rex wasn't pure rage, it was memory. Each clap of thunder, which hadn't even fully arrived, seemed to echo again over the packed earth field where his guide, his human, his partner, his everything, had fallen without warning. He couldn't see the scene clearly. Dogs don't remember like humans do, but he felt it. The smell of warm blood mixed with dust, the acrid taste of smoke, the sound of Daniel's scream, cut short by something no military commander could have foreseen. At first, after being rescued from the rubble, there was only confusion. Too much bright light, unfamiliar hands. The smell of a hospital, of medicine. His bark echoed through the tiled hallways that didn't smell of earth, didn't smell of home, didn't smell of him. Daniel wasn't there. For days, maybe weeks, Rex searched for that specific scent among dozens of others. He never found it again. Then came the transfers. First to another base, then to a police dog pound outside the military environment. Each new place meant new orders, new voices, new hands trying to impose boundaries. Some spoke gently, others too harshly. One tried to use only force, another only patience. All attempts failed in the same way, when a storm arrived, or when, during some training exercise, the sharp sound of an explosion was too reminiscent of the noise of that last explosion. Then Rex would transform. His eyes would darken, his jaw would clench. And it didn't matter who was on the leash. The whole world would become a threat. One of the trainers left with a torn forearm, another with a dislocated shoulder. A third simply asked to be transferred, saying he didn't know what was wrong with the dog, but that whatever it was beyond any technique he knew. Finally, they decided that Rex would only be used in specific situations, with reinforced equipment, a special muzzle, and a double leash. His kennel was separate from the others, farther back where hardly any light penetrated. Some called it a safety measure, but for Rex it was simply another form of loneliness, until Mark arrived. He didn't come to save anyone. He accepted the position in the canine unit because, after his experience in the military, he could no longer imagine himself sitting in an office pretending that paperwork and stamps were enough to give meaning to the rest of his life. He knew how to handle weapons, protocols, and discipline. And although he had never been a dog trainer, he learned to respect working dogs from his very first patrol alongside a German shepherd that detected a mine where no human eye had seen it. When they told him about Rex, they described him as a grenade with the pen off, about to explode at any moment. Some colleagues laughed, saying the dog was crazy, unprogrammed, a lost cause. Mark simply listened in silence. He didn't see himself as a hero, nor as the savior of impossible causes. He carried his own inner demons, nightmares that arrived without warning, like stray bullets at dawn. However, when he stopped in front of Rex's stand for the first time, something made him stay there a few seconds longer than necessary. The dog lay in a corner, its front paws crossed, its gaze fixed on an imaginary point in the hallway. It didn't growl or bark, it simply watched. In that gaze, there was a mixture of defiance and weariness that Mark recognized. The expression of someone who had suffered enough in life not to easily believe appearances. "So you're the famous Rex," he murmured, not waiting for a reply. Rex only moved one ear. In the following days, Mark didn't try to touch him. He didn't rush into the barn, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't wave treats in front of the fence. He simply walked past him, paused for a few seconds, and spoke to him as if commenting on the weather, the hustle and bustle of the street, the morning news. "Did you feel the truth today?" he asked, on an afternoon when the wind heralded another storm. "The noise doesn't bother me either." "You say you're a demon, huh? You hear similar things about me, too." Rex didn't react enthusiastically, but the growling became less frequent as Mark approached. Eventually, gradually giving in, the dog allowed this human to put the leash on his collar, open the door, and lead him to the training yard. It wasn't complete trust, but it was a truce. What neither of them imagined was that the real break in the wall that separated them would not come from the scheduled sessions, but from an accident in an airport corridor, a broken child's suitcase, and a photograph that fell to the ground like a key piece of a forgotten puzzle. Hours after the incident, Mark still felt the weight of that image in his mind. He sat at a metal desk in the unit's small administrative room, a cup of cold coffee beside him, and the black USB drive plugged into the computer, but untouched for the moment. Inside a clear folder lay his military badge and a copy of the photo the girl had kept as if it were a broken treasure. On the other side of the table, an internal affairs official, with a serious expression and her hair tied back in a tight bun, looked at him with tense patience. "So, Agent Mark Lopez," he began, consulting some papers, "explain to me again, why did my dog attack the girl's suitcase?" "My dog?" The expression had always bothered him a little. Rex wasn't his. He belonged to the company, to the files, to the decisions of people who had never walked into a dog kennel at dawn to hear an animal howling for no reason. But at that moment, faced with the possibility that someone might see him only as a problem to be gotten rid of, Mark felt a defensive instinct that surprised even him. "It wasn't an attack as such," he replied, choosing his words carefully. "There was no contact with the girl, only with the suitcase. And I found this." He pointed to the photograph. The woman took it and looked at it carefully. "Is that him?" he asked, pointing his pen at the dog in the photo. "Yes, it's Rex. Younger, but it's him." "And this man?" "First Corporal Daniel Herrera," Mark added before she could finish the sentence. The officer narrowed his eyes. "Did you know him?" Mark took a deep breath. The room seemed to shrink around him. "Not in person. But I served in the same area of operations. His name appears in several classified reports and in a brief account of his death." A heavy silence fell. Outside, distant thunder began to herald the rain. "The official version says he died in an accidental explosion during a routine operation," the woman continued, "and that the dog survived." "Yes, and then you handed it over to the police." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. That very same day, I drop off a girl's suitcase, a girl who apparently is from this Cape, the very day the widow arrives in town to present evidence that her husband's death wasn't an accident. Do you know what this means, Lopez?" Mark looked at the connected USB drive, which no one had opened until then for a ridiculous reason: the fear of discovering that, behind that absurd coincidence, there was something worse than the rumors circulating in the dark corridors. "It means it wasn't a coincidence," he murmured. "Not for the mother, not for the girl, not for the dog." The image of Lily, now he knew her name, kneeling on the ground, fearlessly shouting "Rex," replayed in Mark's mind. That little girl had recognized him, not just from the photo, but for something that transcended logic. Meanwhile, back at the kennel, the same storm raging outside made Rex's heart race. Every glimmer of light was like a memory, every crash a forced return to the day it all ended. He paced back and forth, trying to escape a past that refused to fade away. Then he heard different footsteps in the hallway, light, hurried, but not with the rhythmic weight of his usual boots. He could hear the rustling of fabric, ragged breaths, barely muffled sobs. Rex stopped, his ears perked up. The girl appeared in front of the door, accompanied by a policewoman whose face showed a mixture of irritation and pity. "Just a few minutes, Lily, okay?" the agent said. "Your mother's signing some papers. You shouldn't be here, but fine, hurry up." The girl didn't even respond. Her eyes were swollen, and she was holding the same folded photograph in her hands. She approached the bars, ignoring the sign that read, "Keep your hands away." Rex watched her, motionless. The dim light in the hallway cast shadows across his face. The smell was the same as at the airport, only now without the interference of hundreds of other scents. Sharper, more intense, familiar. Lily carefully placed the photograph between the bars, making sure not to break it further. "Look, Rex," she whispered, as if he could understand every word. "Do you remember?" The dog brought his snout close and sniffed the paper. It smelled of old ink, of fingers that had held it 1,000 times, of recent tears. But beneath all that, deep within the paper fibers, the almost imperceptible trace of another scent. He felt a slight tremor run through his body. For a moment, the doghouse vanished. In its place appeared the blurry image of a dirt yard. Little Daniel, kneeling on the ground, was laughing. The sun was beating down. Little Lily, still in diapers, was trying to grab Rex's ear with both hands. Daniel was expressing something the dog couldn't put into words, only into feelings: security. Rex rested his forehead against the bars, right in front of the camera. Lily took a step forward, almost touching the metal with her nose as well. "Mom says you don't exist," she murmured, "that you took advantage of everything, that you lost yourself, but I knew that wasn't true." The policewoman beside her seemed to want to interrupt, to say that dogs don't understand such things, that it wouldn't be good for the girl. But something in the animal's posture silenced her. Rex didn't growl, didn't lunge. He was there, breathing slowly, as if each of her words, each solution, passed through the filter of his sense of smell. Mark appeared at the end of the corridor, soaked from the torrential rain. He had run from the administration building to the dog pound after a tense argument with the internal affairs officer about what to do with that girl, that widow, and that dog, all linked by an explosion that no one wanted to relive. Seeing Lily standing in front of Rex's cage, his first impulse was to tell her to step back. He remembered the reports, the injuries, the warnings, but the scene paralyzed him. Rex, the demon, the lost cause, bowed before the girl as if he had finally found something stronger than his own fear. Lily's hand was squeezed between two bars, her fingers lightly brushing his snout, tracing invisible lines. Mark walked slowly towards there. "Lily," she called softly, "it's late. Your mother is looking for you." The girl blinked as if waking from a dream, but did not immediately withdraw her hand. "Are they going to take him away?" she asked, without taking her eyes off Rex. "You're a tireless worker, darling. You have to stay here." Lily frowned. A mixture of anger and pain reflected in her gaze. "But it belonged to my dad. It's family." Those words struck Mark like an accusation he didn't even know he deserved. He knew that, technically, Rex belonged to the state, to a cold system of serial numbers and operational files. But seeing the dog and the little girl confronting him with that childlike certainty, he felt that the truth was far less simple than the documents suggested. "Look," he replied, trying to be honest, "right now we're looking into everything. What happened to your father, what was on that USB drive you had in your suitcase, which explains Rex's reaction. I can't promise you anything, but I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't see this as a problem that needs solving." Finally, Lily turned to him. There was something too grown up in the moist gleam of her eyes. "No problem," she said slowly. "He's the only one who leaves me alone, Dad." Mark didn't know what to do. He simply nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility increase on his shoulders. He led the girl back to the main building, where Emily, Daniel's widow, was waiting for her, pale and clutching an envelope of documents to her chest. Emily was not the fragile image of the classic widow. Her features were sharp, as if life had forced her to mature too soon. Her hair was pulled back in a hastily arranged ponytail, and she wore simple clothes and worn shoes. But in her eyes shone a hardened gaze, weathered by years of vague answers, indifferent assistance, and doors that slammed shut the moment she uttered her husband's name and the word truth. When Mark approached with Lily, Emily hugged her tightly. "I told you not to leave," she murmured, her tone more fearful than angry. The girl remained silent, her face hidden against her mother's chest. Only after a few seconds did she look up. "Mom, it's him. It's Rex." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, as if the phrase had been uttered like a gunshot. "Don't say that, Lily. It could be any dog. They look so much alike." "No, that's all. He looked at me like before, and he looks at the photo and—" The girl's voice broke. Emily looked over her daughter's head, directly at Mark, perhaps seeking confirmation, or at least a firm denial that would end that thread of hope, however dangerous it might be. "Well?" he asked. "You're the one who knows about dogs, right?" Mark felt that at that moment any simplistic answer would be cowardly. "There are things I can't explain with manuals," he admitted, "but I reacted in a way I'd never seen before." Emily squeezed the envelope tighter. "Daniel always decided that if he said anything, Rex would find out," she murmured, almost to herself. "Let the dogs feel what we don't want to see." The thunder was so loud it rattled the windows. Lily snuggled a little closer to her mother. Mark realized that the sound had a different meaning for them. It reminded them of the night they received the news of Daniel's death, the abruptly cut-off phone call, the words "explosion," "accident," "we're so sorry," always repeated with a rehearsed coldness. "Mrs. Herrera," she began, choosing her words carefully, "what's on that USB drive? Why am I wearing it today?" Emily took a deep breath, as if she were immersing herself in a past she had tried to stay away from for years. "Because I'm fed up with being told it was an accident," he replied. "That USB drive gave me the chance to meet Daniel shortly before he vanished off the face of the earth. I tell myself that if anyone wanted to know the truth, they had to tell it to someone who wasn't afraid of losing their fortune." She stared intently at Mark. "Are you scared, officer?" He thought about everything he had already lost, the sleepless nights, the memories that would not fade, the constant feeling of living life at full speed. "She has been afraid many times," he admitted, "but I think it's too late to keep obeying without question." That night, back in the administrative office, he was the one who finally opened the contents of the USB drive. Grainy images from the helmet camera, hastily digitized handwritten reports, truncated audio files. Gradually, the official version of the accidental explosion began to crumble. In its place, a much murkier reality emerged. A poorly planned operation, conflicting orders, a superior who insisted on pressing ahead despite all the warning signs. In one of the audio recordings, Daniel's voice sounded irritated, tired, but firm. "I'm not going to expose my team to risk for a statistical whim, Commander. If you want photos for the press, find them elsewhere." Hours after that recording, the explosion. Coincidence or covert punishment for questioning an order? Mark felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't an old, unsolved case. It was a living ghost haunting the kennel where Rex now howled with every clap of thunder. And in the middle of all this, there was Lily, the little girl who drew dogs on notebook paper, stuck them on her bedroom wall, and, according to Emily, said every night before going to bed, "Someday, Rex is going to come back." The following days were a strange dance between protocol and emotion. In the morning, the official investigations began to move slowly, like rusty gears. In the afternoon, Emily was called in for questioning. Her voice recalled details no one wanted to hear. That evening, Lily asked to spend just a few minutes at the kennel in front of Rex's cage. Against all common sense and some strict rules, Mark gradually gave in. First, he allowed the girl to see him from a distance, in the hallway, without touching him. Then he let her get a little closer. One day, when the kennel was almost empty and it was drizzling, he risked doing something he would never have thought of. He took Rex's muzzle off in front of Lily. He did it slowly, warning, "If I see anything strange, I'll return it immediately, okay?" Rex tensed for a moment as he felt Mark's hand untying the leash. He was used to associating that with commands, actions, risky situations. But when the leash finally came loose and his snout was free, the only strong scent he perceived was that of the little girl in front of him. Lily extended her hand, hesitant but determined. He sniffed it, catching Daniel's echo again in the childlike scent, and made a decision no training could have predicted. He bowed his head and rested it against the bars, sideways, offering his neck in a posture of surrender that Mark had never seen in that animal. The girl let out a soft giggle, a pure sound that echoed in the thick air of the kennel. She stroked the thick fur delicately, as if afraid that any sudden movement would make it disappear. "You find it strange, Rex," he murmured. "I'll wait for you for a long time." That "I waited for you" also stuck with Mark, because in silence he himself had waited for something he couldn't name, a meaning, a gesture, anything that would justify continuing to wake up every morning. From that day on, Rex's transformation was no longer imperceptible. Mark, used to observing details, began to notice small changes. The dog ate more regularly on the days Lily came. He drank water without his previous agitation. He slept on his side, relaxed, on the nights following the visits, and the howls during storms became less prolonged, as if the memory of the past noise still surfaced, but now had a different antidote to despair. At the training field, when Mark tried to teach him to obey new commands or repeat old ones, the response remained erratic. Rex was efficient but stubborn, as if he ignored the commands he didn't understand. However, all Lily had to do was lean against the fence and call him, "Come here, Rex, here," and the dog would obey with an almost childlike impulse. One day, Mark brought in a rubber ball, one of those used for training, and threw it on the floor. Rex eyed it suspiciously, used to picking up only things that smelled of explosives or illicit substances. Uninhibited play was no longer part of his repertoire. Years of work and trauma had erased it. But Lily, who was outside, began to applaud. "Let's see, Rex, tra-la-la." There was no reasoning involved. Just like in the airport corridor, the dog's body reacted first. It ran after the ball, grabbed it, and instead of returning it to Mark, carried it to the nearest point to the girl, dropping it there, tongue lolling and eyes shining for a moment. Mark laughed, surprised. Don't look at anything else, at the most aggressive corporation playing football. Lily returned the smile with pride, as if she had performed a miracle. As the bond between the girl and the dog deepened, the investigation into Daniel also progressed, albeit slowly. The USB drive had revealed more than expected. Documents suggesting that Daniel's superior had ignored basic safety measures to expedite a simulated operation, designed more to generate figures and photos for reports than to protect lives. There were also indications that some records had been altered after the explosion to protect the careers of people with important connections, something that, as everyone knew, could be buried forever if it fell into the wrong hands. Mark became increasingly involved, not just out of professional duty, but for something personal, intimate, difficult to explain. He saw in Daniel the kind of soldier he had tried to be, the kind of man he would have liked to have as a partner. He saw in Emily and Lily the faces of so many families who never truly knew what had become of their dead. And he saw in Rex a kind of distorted mirror. Both bore invisible scars from decisions made far above them, in brightly lit rooms where thunder and explosions were just graphics on screens. One afternoon, while reviewing the images on the USB drive, Mark found something that took his breath away. It was a short video, clearly recorded without permission, a shaky shot from someone who had left a hidden camera recording in the background of a room. In the image, Daniel was standing in front of a higher-ranking man. The argument appeared to have already begun when the video started. "All I'm saying, Commander, is that we can't keep lying in the reports," Daniel said, visibly tense but still respectful. "Rex didn't lose control. He reacted to an explosive I never wanted to see." "Be careful what you say, Herrera," the superior replied, crossing his arms. "That dog is a valuable asset, just like you. I'm not going to let you become the perfect excuse to question strategic decisions." "No excuses," Daniel insisted. "It's the reality. This dog saved more lives than anyone willing to admit. If you insist on sending the unit to an area that hasn't been evacuated, next time there won't be any video or report that can hide the bodies." The video ended abruptly, as if the author had been forced to turn off the camera in a hurry. Mark leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Now everything made even more sense, or rather, even less. Rex wasn't just a war survivor. He was a living witness to injustices that someone wanted to erase. That same day, it rained with unprecedented force. The sky opened up over the city, the streets filled with deep puddles, and lightning tore through the dense clouds. In the dog pound, the noise was deafening, amplified by the metal and concrete. Rex began pacing, restless as he had been the first few nights. The work of the previous weeks, Lily's visits, everything seemed threatened by the sheer force of the sound. Mark, noticing the change in the internal cameras, dropped everything he was doing and ran over. He found the dog scratching at the bars, its chest heaving and its gaze unfocused, a memory the human couldn't access but knew was there. "Relax, Rex, relax," he murmured, unlocking the padlock with a swift motion. As soon as the door opened, the dog nearly knocked him over, not by attacking, but by fleeing. It darted past him like lightning, running down the corridor to the service door that led to the outside courtyard. "Rex, stop!" The storm answered for him. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, followed by a clap of thunder so loud that it made the dog tuck his tail between his legs and speed up even more, as if his only way out was to get as far away from the sound as possible. The patio door wasn't completely closed. Someone had left it ajar hours earlier. Rex pushed it open with his weight and stepped out into the damp night. Mark ran after her, slipping in the stagnant water. His heart racing. He saw only a dark silhouette disappearing behind the fence,
an unlikely gap between two sheets of metal that some careless worker had never repaired. The news spread quickly through the unit. The aggressive dog escaped during the storm. While decisions were being made hastily, sending vehicles, alerting patrols, warning the population, on the other side of the city, a different, much less formal reaction was taking place. Lily, who was sleeping at her aunt's house that night, woke with a start at the sound of thunder. She looked out the window and, for some reason she couldn't explain, had the distinct feeling that someone was calling her. It wasn't the father's voice, it wasn't the mother's. It was something different, a warm premonition like an invisible thread tugging at the chest. "Auntie," she murmured, getting out of bed, "I have to go see Rex." The aunt, exhausted, didn't even open her eyes. "It's very late, Lily. Go to sleep." But the girl couldn't. She got up, put on her sweatshirt, slipped on her sneakers, grabbed the small flashlight she used to read secretly at night, and quietly slipped out the back door. The house was a few blocks from an empty lot that, in turn, connected to a scattered wooded area on the outskirts of the city. It made no sense for her to go there, but her steps led her in that direction, guided more by her heart than by logic. At that precise moment, Rex ran aimlessly, gripped by panic. Lightning illuminated trees, fences, and walls. Every shadow became a potential enemy. The muddy ground gave way beneath his paws, causing him to slip several times. Somewhere far from the unit, the pungent smell of asphalt gave way to the damp scent of earth and leaves. He entered an area of patchy vegetation, with patches of weeds dotted with makeshift paths left by those who had passed through during the day. Now, however, there was no one there, only the rain and the echo of his own memories. Until a familiar scent pierced the storm like an arrow. Baby sweat, cheap detergent, the faint scent of a sweatshirt she'd already learned to recognize from afar. Lily. Rex stopped dead in his tracks, his paws sinking into the mud. His heart, which until then had been pounding with fear, changed its rhythm. The instinct to flee fought for a moment against another impulse, the instinct to protect. A flash illuminated the path that lay before him, revealing the small silhouette of a boy walking with difficulty, holding a trembling lantern in his hand. "Rex," she whispered, as if the name were a prayer. "Where are you?" The dog barked briefly out of instinct. Lily turned toward the sound, and her face was illuminated by another flash of lightning. "Rex!" He ran toward the call, unaware that the terrain ahead was steeper than it appeared. The rain of the past few days had softened the earth, and some slender trees seemed to be supporting an entire embankment with astonishing tenacity. Rex saw her slip and heard her scream as she lost her balance. In a matter of seconds, the section of the embankment where she stood gave way, dragging mud, rocks, and the girl down in a small, silent avalanche. Without thinking twice, the dog lunged at him. He leaped over the exposed roots, felt the mud tugging at his paws, and breathed in the water and earth. By the time he reached Lily, she was already tumbling down the slope, her hands desperately trying to grab hold of something. He dove to the side, using his own body as a barrier, pushing her toward a less steep area. A tree planted on the edge of the precipice buckled under the weight of the disturbed earth and began to tumble toward them. Rex, still moving, caught a glimpse of the trunk approaching like a dense shadow. There was no time to dodge it. Instinctively, he nudged her with his snout, forcing her back as she stood in his path. The tree trunk struck him with a sharp crack, pinning his back to the sodden ground. Pain shot up her spine like fire. Lily screamed his name, trying to crawl backward, but the ground kept shifting and small landslides continued. She managed to reach Rex's head and hugged him tightly, as the rain washed away the dirt, blood, and tears. "Don't leave me, Rex, please," she sobbed. "Don't abandon me, too." She was breathing heavily, the air coming in and out in short gasps, accompanied by soft moans.
The smell of her own pain was intense, but even stronger was the smell of the girl's fear. As the storm continued to rage in the sky, something inside her, paradoxically, calmed down. In that moment, the old war and the explosion of the past ceased to exist. Only the boy who, by some miracle, had rescued him from a dark place, and who now needed him more than ever, existed. Rex tried to move his hind legs. He couldn't. The log weighed him like a wall. In the distance, Mark drove a patrol car through the flooded streets, the windshield wipers struggling to maintain minimal visibility. He had received news of Rex's escape, and, a few minutes later, a desperate report from Lily's aunt saying the girl wasn't home. The two pieces of information collided in his mind with lightning speed. This wasn't simply a runaway dog. This was a traumatized dog, loose in the middle of a storm, bound by an inexcusable connection to a child who also carried storms within him. "You have to go to the ravine," he said over the radio, his voice punctuated by static. "There's less noise from the city here." She organized a sort of impromptu search with police officers and some volunteers from the community, people who knew the wooded area. Emily insisted on going with them, despite all the warnings about the danger. "I'm not going to sit idly by," she said, her eyes blazing with a determination no one dared question.
"If my daughter is out there, I'm out there too." Flashlights pierced the darkness with flickering beams. Shouts of "Lily!" and "Rex!" mingled with the sound of the rain. At one point, breathless, Mark stopped, trying to hear something beyond the rapid beating of his own heart. It was then that a faint bark, almost drowned out by the roar of the storm, reached his ears. It wasn't a simple cry for help. There was a particular urgency in that voice, a tone he had learned to recognize after months alongside that instinctive muscle called Rex. "Over there," he pointed without hesitation. They climbed up a slippery slope, some sliding on their knees, others using roots for support. Reaching the edge of a small landslide, their flashlights finally illuminated the scene. The fallen tree, the churned mud, the dislocated silhouette of a dog trapped by the trunk, and, clinging to its neck as if trying to prevent the earth from burying it, the tiny figure of Lily. "Lily!" Emily's scream tore through the night. The girl lifted her face, her eyes wide open, trembling from head to toe. "Mom, Rex can't move!" Mark didn't think twice. He slid down the slope, feeling the mud get into his boots, and knelt beside the two of them. "Calm down, Lily, calm down," she said, though she knew the word "calm down" sounded almost like an insult given the situation. "We'll get them out of here." They quickly assessed the situation. The tree wasn't huge, but it was heavy enough to crush Rex's hind legs. Moving it carelessly could injure him further or shift him in a way that would be dangerous for Lily. A simple plan was improvised. Two men would hold the base of the log, another the middle section with a rope, and Mark would be ready to pull Rex up as soon as the weight lessened. Emily, even disobeying orders, refused to climb back up. "I'll keep my daughter," he said, sitting down next to Lily and putting his arm around her. As they began to lift the log with all their might, a new roar shook the earth. They had to shout orders, coordinate their movements, and exert force out of sheer desperation. In a few seconds that felt like hours, the weight on Rex's body lessened enough for Mark to drag him, holding him by his front legs and chest. The dog let out a whimper of pain, but didn't bite or attack anyone. It kept its gaze fixed on Lily, as if it needed to make sure she was really there. As soon as they pulled him out of the danger zone, the tree trunk gave way completely and slid several more meters down the hillside. Had they waited a little longer, perhaps neither of them would have been in a condition to be rescued. Minutes later, inside the vehicle serving as a makeshift animal ambulance, Rex lay on blankets, breathing with difficulty. His hind legs were unresponsive. He had blood mixed with mud on various parts of his body. Lily, sitting beside him, held the dog's enormous head with both hands. "Hang on, Rex," she whispered. "Hang on like you did, okay? That's how you stayed strong when you explored everything." Mark drove as if every second were ticking away on a clock about to stop. The nearest hospital had an emergency veterinary unit affiliated with the police. He had called ahead, warning them that they would be arriving with a seriously injured police dog. He didn't mention, because there wasn't time, that this animal not only belonged to the force, but was the pillar of a shattered family. The hours melted into a succession of white lights, the smell of antiseptics, and hurried voices. They took Rex to a room where they tried to stabilize him. Fractures, internal bleeding, a real risk of not surviving. Outside, in a waiting room far too uncomfortable for so much pain, Emily and Lily huddled together in plastic chairs. Mark paced back and forth, unable to stay still, feeling in his skin, in his bones, the mixture of guilt and responsibility.
If only I had locked the damn patio door. If only I had predicted that the storm would frighten Rex. If only I had stopped Lily from getting so close. The yes answers formed an endless line, while on the other side of a wall, lives were hastily being pieced back together. At one point, a tired-looking veterinarian appeared at the door. "We did everything we could for now," he said, looking first at Mark, then at Emily and Lily. "The operation was complicated. We managed to stabilize her, but the next 22 hours will be critical. Don't lie, there's a high risk you won't survive. And if you do survive, you may never walk the same way again." Lily rested her face against her mother's chest, letting out a stifled sob. Emily blinked several times, trying to hold back the tears that, however, eventually overwhelmed her. "Can we see it?" he asked in a hoarse voice. One by one, and in just a few minutes. Mark was about to step aside to let them go first. But Emily stopped him with a gesture. "You're coming in too," he said. "We wouldn't be here without you." In the small, makeshift room where Rex rested, connected to wires and tubes, the silence had a different feel. The constant beeping of the monitors and the faint hiss of a ventilator could be heard. The dog, lying on his side, seemed smaller than he was, shrunken from the physical trauma compounded by the emotional one. Lily approached slowly, as if afraid of waking him from a much-needed sleep. "Hello, Rex," she murmured, gently touching his forehead. "It's me." The dog's eyes moved beneath his eyelids. Slowly they opened, revealing a glimmer dulled by the medication, but still recognizable. When his vision cleared, the first thing he saw was the girl's face, as close as ever through the bars of the cage, only now without the metal barrier between them. Its scent, even mixed with that of a hospital, was a thread that kept him tied to the present, preventing him from returning completely to the darkness from which he had barely emerged. Rex tried to wag his tail. He barely reacted. But his eyes said everything his body couldn't express. Emily, a few steps behind, watched the scene with her hand over her mouth. In that instant, she didn't just see a dog in a hospital bed. She saw her husband's companion, the animal he had spoken of so many times in letters and audio messages sent from the front. "When you get back, Lily will see how big Rex is," said one of the recordings saved on her old cell phone. "If you want them to be siblings." That promise, interrupted by the explosion, seemed in some twisted way to be coming true there. Mark, leaning discreetly against the wall, felt a burning in his eyes. He thought of all the dogs he had seen die silently, without ceremony, without families nearby. Rex, at least, wasn't alone. The following hours passed in a tense vigil. Emily and Lily took turns staying with the dog. Mark went back and forth between the hospital and the police station, where the investigation into Daniel was taking on a more official character.
The video extracted from the USB drive, the falsified reports, and the testimonies of former colleagues were beginning to form a case that was difficult to ignore. There were meetings with superiors, heated arguments, and attempts to cover up the case. But the combination of evidence and public pressure, fueled in part by the story that had begun to circulate informally about the hero dog who saved his former trainer's daughter, made it increasingly risky to pretend nothing had happened. On a clear morning, ironically serene after so many stormy days, news began to circulate through the unit's corridors. The High Command had acknowledged a serious procedural error in the operation that cost Daniel his life. Formal apologies would be offered to the family. Back pay would be paid. And an internal investigation would be opened against the former superior, now retired, who appeared in the videos. It wasn't complete justice, it didn't bring anyone back, it didn't erase years of pain. But it was, finally, a public acknowledgement that Daniel hadn't been reckless, that he hadn't died due to incompetence, but while trying to protect his team and his dog. When Emily received the news, still in the hospital, her hands were trembling so much that she could barely sign the new document presented to her. Lily, upon hearing the word justice, immediately looked at Rex, as if this achievement also belonged to him. Days later, against all odds, the dog began to show better than expected signs of recovery. He still couldn't walk properly, he limped badly, and perhaps he would never run like he used to. But with the help of orthotics and under the watchful eye of the physical therapists, he took a few hesitant steps toward the little girl who was calling him from across the hall. It was in this context that the idea arose that would forever change the destiny of them all. In a more informal meeting in the unit commander's office, Mark submitted a written request. The handwriting, though firm, betrayed a barely contained tension. I request, as an exceptional matter, that consideration be given to removing Rex from active service and allowing him to be adopted by the family of his former trainer, Corporal First Class Daniel Herrera. The commander read the text silently. He knew that, technically, Rex could still be useful to the corporation in simpler tasks. But he also knew that keeping that animal in an operational environment after everything that had come to light would be another way of prolonging unnecessary suffering. "Did you know what you gained from this, Lopez?" he asked, intrigued. Mark considered the honest answer, which might be too long for a standard sentence. Perhaps he would get the feeling of having helped to repair a part of the world that he himself had helped to break years before by blindly following orders in other operations. "We would all win," he replied, opting for a middle ground. "The unity, to show that only we use animals as disposable tools. The Herrera family, to recover a member who was taken from them. And Rex finally had a place where he felt at home. For a rat, just an aggressive dog." There were debates, legal opinions, and evaluations by veterinarians and psychologists. But for the first time in a long time, the bureaucracy opted for something more humane. A few weeks later, the small courtyard of the police station was filled with people. There were uniforms, press cameras, and a flag waving in the wind. In the center, a modest stage with a microphone and a table where some medals rested. In one of the front row seats, Emily clasped her hands, trying to control her anxiety. Beside her, Lily trembled with anticipation, her gaze fixed on the door through which, in a matter of moments, the protagonists of a ceremony that would be both official and deeply personal would enter. As the ceremony began, a respectful silence fell over the place. The commander took to the podium and delivered a speech about service, sacrifice, and acknowledging mistakes. Then he mentioned Daniel Herrera's name, posthumously awarding him a medal for valor. Emily stepped onto the podium and accepted the medal on her husband's behalf. The applause was thunderous, but for her, each clap was also a belated echo of something that should have been recognized years ago. Even so, she clutched the medal to her chest as if it were a hug from beyond the grave. Then came the moment Lily had been waiting for. Now, the commander announced with a slight smile that was rarely seen on his face, "We also want to recognize a four-legged member who has demonstrated a loyalty that transcends time and fear." The side door opened. Mark appeared, impeccably dressed in his uniform, holding Rex's leash. The dog walked slowly, still limping slightly on his left hind leg. He wore a special vest with a ribbon in the team's colors. Seeing Lily in the front row, he paused for a moment, as if to confirm that it wasn't another hallucination from the hospital. Unable to contain herself, the girl broke protocol and ran towards him. Some officers shifted, worried, but the commander discreetly raised his hand, signaling them to leave. Lily threw herself to her knees before Rex, hugging his neck tightly and burying her face in his thick fur. "I told you so," she murmured, crying and laughing at the same time. "I knew you'd come back to me." Rex bowed his head and rested it on her shoulder. His tail, though slowly, wagged for the first time in public in front of so many people. Those who knew the whole story understood the meaning of that small gesture. Mark approached and handed the leash to Emily. "From today onward," he said, his voice a little hoarse, "if you agree, Rex is not in charge of the unit. It's you." Emily picked up the leash with trembling hands. She looked at the dog, at her daughter, at the man standing in front of her. "It was always ours," he replied in a low but firm voice. "It's just that the world was slow to realize it." The photographer's flashes went off. The commander officially presented Rex with a symbolic medal to pin on his vest, in recognition of his having saved the girl during the storm. Some of his comrades, who had previously called him a demon, approached to respectfully pet him, now seeing that this animal was not a monster, but a survivor who had finally found safe haven. Later, away from the formalities, in the small rented house where Emily and Lily lived, the atmosphere was different. There were open boxes on the floor, toys scattered everywhere, and a makeshift bed of blankets in a corner of the room, carefully prepared to receive the new tenant. Rex wandered slowly through the house, sniffing every corner. It was strange to see him without his cage, without his duty vest, just a big dog getting used to the idea of having a home. In Lily's room, she stopped in front of the wall where dozens of drawings were taped. Almost all of them depicted the same figure, a German shepherd next to a little girl with braids. Some had a uniformed man in the background, others a huge, smiling sun. He sniffed one of the papers, perceived the smell of school ink, the aroma of the room, of the girl who was now sitting on the bed, watching him with a smile that barely fit on her face. "Do you like it?" he asked. "I've told you many times so you don't forget me." Rex approached the bed, placed his front paws on the mattress, and with effort climbed up. He lay down beside her, resting his head on the girl's chest, listening to the beating of the small heart that, in a way, had also kept him alive until then. Emily, standing by the door, watched the scene with tears in her eyes. When Daniel talked about the future, he usually described something like this: a simple house, his daughter running through the garden, Rex lying on the porch. He might not be there physically anymore, but part of that dream was finally becoming a reality. Mark stopped by for a quick visit, still smelling of recent paperwork. He'd left several reports unfinished, but he needed to see for himself how the dog was doing in its new life. As he entered, he was greeted by a short bark and a wagging tail in recognition. Rex didn't rush towards him with the same enthusiasm he had shown Lily, but he came close enough to brush his muzzle with his hand. "I see you're in good hands, mate," said Mark, scratching behind his ear. Lily appeared from behind, hugging the dog's neck from behind. "Now we're family, right, Mom?" he asked, turning to Emily. The mother smiled, tired but sincere. "Yes, my love, a rather unique family, full of scars, but a finite family." Outside, the sky was beginning to cloud over again, heralding more rain. When the first clap of thunder echoed in the distance, Rex raised his head, alert. For a moment, the old ghosts tried to insinuate themselves, bringing with them the smell of burnt sand and the metallic taste of fear. But before panic could take hold of her, she felt Lily's small hand gently stroking her neck. "Nothing's happening here, Rex," she murmured, brushing her forehead against his. "It just rained here." Emily approached and sat down next to the two of them. She ran her hand through the dog's thick fur, just as she had seen Daniel do so many times in old videos. "You're not at war," he whispered. "None of us." The storm intensified, and the raindrops pounded against the roof with their usual sound. But inside that little house,
The noise had a different meaning. It was just rain. And for the first time in many years, the thunder wasn't a death sentence, but a reminder that it had passed, and that, despite everything, something inside had survived long enough to find a new form. Rex closed his eyes, relaxing his entire body between the girl and the woman. It wasn't a perfect ending. The physical and emotional scars would remain. But there was a peace he had never known before. In some corner of the dog's memory, Daniel's voice echoed like a final command, soft and satisfied. "Good boy, Rex. You're home now." He didn't understand every word, but he understood the tone. And as the sound of rain lulled the small room, he drifted off to sleep, knowing that if the storms returned, and they always would, he wouldn't be alone in the noise anymore. Now he had someone to share his fear with. And, thanks to a broken suitcase that appeared at the precise place and time, the whole world witnessed the silent rebirth of a shattered hero who, at last, had been reunited with his family.